Hello and welcome. I am Scrapperlock and this is City of Heroes. We are with our level 31 character, Liberty Lass, who's earned 1.3 million XP, about 300,000 to go to get to level 32, 8 million plus influence earned. We've got a bit more than we had because I ran some uh, flashback missions, one shot mission and then a story arc. We're up to 390 merits. We're getting there. We need 600 to get our first archetype origin enhancement. And we're still on the corporate culture story arc. The Kellermans have been through a lot. We finally found out that the Krayt Mind Control Center is in a particular location on Talos Island, and it is time to go and take it out. So they can't mind control people anymore. Or at least, I don't think they're actually mind controlling that many people. I think their plan is to put mind control in their operating system so that it'll control us all, right? Not too far from reality. We do know that most of these companies that make the big operating systems that have permeated the world, if they could mind control you, they'd be happy to put that into their operating system to make you buy more of their products, right? I mean, after all, that's what a lot of it's about. All right, so we are here, and all of our toggles are going, and in we go. And as we go, what I'd like to do today is actually something came up um, while I was doing the flashback missions. I was sort of sitting on the help channel and doing that a lot more than I don't do it a lot while I'm doing this playthrough because we're in the middle of shooting video here, but I was watching and I was sort of trying to help if people ask questions. I didn't honestly post very much, but one of the things I wanted to talk about is build advice, and this might lead into a comment on build tuning, but I'm gonna do that afterwards. First, I want to talk about build advice. So, my what I tried to urge the one person who was asking questions to do was to be careful. Right? Be careful about following the advice of other people about how to build your character successfully. And the reason that I urge caution isn't that I think anybody is trying to give you bad advice or harm you. Nobody's trying to do that. Everybody on the help channel, and if you didn't want to help people, you wouldn't sit on the help channel, right? So everybody's trying to be helpful. There's no question in my mind that that's true. The problem is that people make very specific assumptions about how you're going to play and what your goals are, right? When I talk about the build advice that Nina, the leader of the Daybreak Initiative, was giving to the people on our guild, she had very specific assumptions about how you were going to play the game. And she would have certainly, I think she probably did acknowledge, if we ever talked about it, I don't specifically remember it, but we may have, we probably did, and my gosh, I miss a lot. With 70% to hit, and I'll whiff 3 times out of 4, I was fighting Devouring Earth, and I missed the one guy like 3 times in a row, and then the auto hit happened, right, the Streak Breaker, and then I missed again, and when I looked, so yeah, you've got a 70% to hit, but I rolled like, including the Streak Breaker, I rolled over 70 like 8 times in a row. I think there's something weird going on with the RNG. I really do. And I've thought that for a long time, and it's going to be very hard to convince me that there's not anything weird going on with the RNG, because it doesn't seem to be the case. It's not the case that, well, when I start missing a lot, I've got 20% to hit. It's like if I just go below 75, go down to 60%, and I just whiff constantly, missing more than half the time. And it's not that I'm rolling. It's not that it. How can I say that? It's not that when I roll a 51 I miss. It's that when I have a 50% chance to hit, I. How do I say this? It's not that when I roll below a 50 I miss. It's that I keep rolling above a 50. It's almost like the game is biased to generating numbers closer to 100. And that's why you need these very high percent chance to hits just not to get missed streaks. Anyway, getting back to what I was saying about builds. What I'm doing here is a very specific thing, and this is why when I talk about, giving build advice, wow, another boss. When I talk about giving build advice, right, I don't tell people how to play. I say, this is how I do it. If you want to do it like me, here's how it goes. And I've said several times here and in the comments that I can't advise you in how to do things that I play the way I don't, right? I can't give people advice on how to deal with Incarnate Trials or how to build to succeed at Incarnate Trials. I've never played in one. I can't tell you how to win at a Hamadon raid. I've never done it. I know what Nina was recommending. I'm making assumptions about why she recommended it, but I can't specifically tell you exactly why she recommended stuff because I didn't play the way she was recommending the builds for playing, right? I didn't play with the style that the build advice she was giving was designed to help you do. And that's what I was saying before I started complaining about misses. I play story arcs. I start at level 1, I go to level 50, and when I hit level 50, I stop and I start a new character. I don't do endgame content. I don't farm. I don't seek to gain, I don't seek to break records for fastest run to number 50. I was actually watching a guy. I've never seen how you farm. I've never done it. I've never tried to do it. A video popped up in my feed. How to farm with a Spines Fire, either Scrapper or Brute. I think it was a Brute. And he showed how he built his character. It is not in any way the way I would build a character. Because it was designed for farming. Right? I don't know how useful it would be in a mission like this. But it was designed for farming. And he did something very specific with it. He went into a specific mission that was designed by the person who built the mission in the Architect for farming. He brought in a specifically built character that was designed to exploit that mission. And he had his character built in a way that exploited what the character was able to do. That is the correct way to build that character and run that mission to do the farming. But it wouldn't necessarily help you do a normal story arc and defeat Dr. Vajilok. Because it's a completely different way of playing the game. Right? And so I can describe what he did. But the point I'm making here is if that person is giving build advice about how to farm and then you try to follow it to play like this, you're not going to have a good experience because that's not what his advice was designed for you to do. So just be careful because a lot of players do the Architect farming, farm a billion influence, and then there was another video, I didn't watch it, how to get from level 1 to 50 in under 2 hours or something like that, right? So you farm, then you get your quote-unquote real character from 1 to 50 in 2 hours, and then you go do the Incarnate Trials. There are a lot of players who view that as the way they play City of Heroes, and there's nothing wrong with it, but if you want to do story arcs, their build advice is not going to help you. It could hurt you because it could be setting you up to have a character that's not designed to do the story arcs properly, right? It's designed to do specific things. Well, if you can survive the Incarnate Trials, surely you can survive your story arcs. Well, maybe, but remember, Incarnate Trials aren't done solo. They're done on a group of 24 or whatever. And so they're not, like, if you're building a tank, right, their build advice isn't for a tank to solo, right? It's for a tank to get through particular Architect missions as quickly as possible and then be on a group and be the taunt vehicle for that group to go through the Incarnate Trials or whatever, right? And so what I urged that person who was asking for advice on the channel is just to be cautious about taking advice. Not saying any of the advice is wrong, but just keep in mind that there are lots of ways to play the game. And my advice for how to build a character to run story arcs at +1, right, isn't necessarily going to work. Even for other archetypes. doing story arcs, let alone work to do Incarnate Trials or endgame content or Hamadon raids or what have you. Now let me give you an example. This character is designed to run normal story arcs. She's designed to enter spawns meant for 1 to 2 characters within a level or 2 of her level. She is designed to have a closed attack chain where I am aggressively punching the attack buttons, and there's at least, what a closed attack chain means is that when you get through the cycle of your attacks, by the time you've clicked everything, one of the buttons is back up. So there's always an active button that is there for you to click on, and you never have to wait. Now, you've seen me waiting a few times. We don't have a closed attack chain right now because we have a bunch of yellow recharge enhancers on here, and so where things aren't recharging at the maximum rate, right? These are only 30% now instead of, 34% or whatever, and that actually makes a difference of a fraction of a second here and there, and over the course of a couple of attack chains, we have to sit and wait. We're also being hit, both here and with the 5th column, we've been hit with ice attacks which slow you. And the counter to that, and I'm thinking about, when we're going to get this, but I think we need to get it, possibly at 35. I don't know if I'm going to bother with Resurgence. If this power is just a self-res, what do we need that for? But I died twice in 31 levels. Who needs it? We'll just go to the hospital the once or twice a level we die. If it does something else, maybe I'd get it. But it may be that level 35 I'm going to grab Hasten. And the reason to have Hasten would be to pop that to counteract the slow, right? Because it speeds you up. And you can use it other times too, but the goal of it would be to counteract slows so that we can keep the attack chain going properly, right? We're also going to get another attack at level 32, which isn't just 8 beads, right? And that will be added in here. And then we will have all of these things for our attack chain. And sooner or later, I'll get the alchemy right, so we'll have a closed attack chain, right? So my goal is to have a closed attack chain so that when I'm attacking enemies, I can non-stop attack them, as you're going to see in this next sequence, and just keep hitting attack, attack, attack. This is what I do with the Brute, right? I didn't do that with my Mastermind. I had other purposes and other goals with her because she had pets. But that's what I'm trying to do with this Brute. So what this player had was, when you looked at his powers, he only had 4 powers. One of them was taunt. No, 5 powers. He had taunt. He had build up, and those were fully slotted, right? I don't know if taunt build up was 3 slotted with recharge. He had a 6 slotted quills because he was a Spine's Fire, which is the AOE attack, would be like Whirling Hands, and then he just had the 2 entry powers with 1 slot each. And then he had all of his. He was level 47 or something when he was doing this. All of his secondaries, and they were all 6 slotted, and they all had enhancement sets on them. And he said, other than quills, I don't use the primaries. A Brute who doesn't use his primaries. What he had was fire, and I guess he had the powers of fire working, Fiery Embrace, whatever it's called, that do damage to enemies. And so what he was doing was he was going into the mission. He was taunting everybody he could taunt. He was gathering up all the aggro. It was an outdoor mission, I think. So there weren't any walls or whatever, and there were all these enemies around, and he would just taunt the whole thing, and he got the maximum number of them around him, and he just burned them to death, and then taunted more, and burned them to death, and taunted more, and burned them to death. And by the way, he was doing these missions on -1. He said, because it's just faster, right? And he said, I can do this, and in one mission, I can earn, between, he said, 500,000 and 12 million influence. Not from the mission itself, but from all of the orange salvage and recipes that you get that you can then put on the auction house. I think, I may be mistaken, I think almost all the mobs in the Architect mission were lieutenants, and that's why they were doing all these great drops. Maybe they were all bosses, I don't know. But he was getting all these loot drops. They weren't doing anything to him because Fire has a self-heal, and he walked in with, I think, a whole tray of heals, right? He didn't have anything else, I'm pretty sure, and he was just going in there and just melting everything with his fire secondary. But it was done in a very specific way, right? He had to have specific sets that did, remember we talked about the procs, specific sets that did the procs that did damage, plus the damage that was done by the fire powers, and then Quills, which is an AoE. And he just would hit Quills when it was up, and then the rest of the time he was just using his fire secondary. And that style of play would probably not work very well in a mission like this, because it's predicated on just standing there and letting all the enemies come to you, but nobody's going to come to you in a mission like this. They're all isolated in rooms. You can't really... it would be so impractical to try to gather them all up in a mission like this. Also, he was fighting at -1. We're fighting at +1. So he specifically said, okay, you probably won't die doing it at -1, but it's going to take a really long time, and it would be very hard to do, and it's not necessarily worth it, because you're going to get loot either way, and it doesn't matter what level you are. If you get orange loot, you get orange loot, right? And the goal of the farming missions is to farm salvage and recipes to sell on the auction house, right? So what he was doing was going into a specific architect mission that was designed to drop loot, and he was fighting specific enemies that were vulnerable to fire, right? I mean, the person who made the mission made it for a farming mission. He showed which one to pick in the architect, and it's made for fire farming, right? So they put enemies in the architect creator put enemies in the mission that are meant to be defeated by people using fire. The Cray are not meant for that. The Freak Show are not meant for that. Right? So it wouldn't work against Freak Show. They're going to res. They have electricity. They're going to take down your endurance, right? That character wouldn't work as a general proposition against normal missions. It's specifically designed for that particular type of farming mission. Now, in that farming mission, that character would finish that mission and earn more influence way faster than Liberty Lass could. But that character would have a much harder time in a mission like this, because it's not designed to be able to play missions like this. It's just for farming. The real character that you play that's designed to do normal stuff would be built a different way, right? Assuming you have that and you're not just a farmer. I don't know what the point would be of farming without doing anything else, but maybe some people just want to make the number of in their influence go up and up and up and see what the maximum you can have. I don't know. Is there a maximum, guys? Is it like 100 billion or a trillion? Like, what's the biggest number that City of Heroes can actually store down here? Like, how far over can it go? I don't know, right? And maybe there's somebody who just wants to find out. And there's nothing wrong with that. Whatever is fun for you, as long as it's not an exploit, and none of these things are exploits, go for it. But if you build a character like that, you have to understand that it's going to play a certain way. And if you're just like, I want to do some solo missions for, Philippa Moreau, well, that's not the build you want, right? Because it's not designed for this. So what I'm trying to urge people to do is be careful about taking build advice. Make sure when you're, look at the misses, when you're taking build advice from somebody either in the help channel over here or on Discord, whether it's your own super group or whatever, or when you're taking build advice from somebody on YouTube, right? Make sure you clarify with them, what type of playstyle are you talking about? In some cases, the mere question will absolutely stun them, because a lot of people are shocked that anyone plays the game other than how they do it. Right? So, like, people in my supergroup, I constantly had to remind them, I don't do incarnate trials, I don't farm, I just play story arcs. And I would then get why. They couldn't even imagine it, because they're like, well, we've done that already, right? A lot of them said, we came back to City of Heroes, we hadn't played it in years, We made up a character on the hero side, ran all the story arcs to level 50. We made up a villain on the villain side, ran all the story arcs to 50. We're done with that. We don't need to do those story arcs again. Now we're farming and doing the other endgame stuff. There's nothing wrong with that. But they were frequently stunned that here I was, you know, a year or two later, and I'm still doing story arcs. How many times do you need to do the Scroll of Tieleku? Well, lots, because I like it. Right? What am I doing with this character? I'm turning XP off. I'm going back to the Ouroboros off screen, and I'm doing story arcs. I did the Devouring Earth story arc. Do I have it here? Will of the Earth, right? I did this story arc over the last couple days, right? I wasn't given it. You saw me. Nobody gave it to me when I was actually level 25 to 29. So I went back and did it myself, right? With this character. My plan with this character is to do what I never got around to doing with Silver Phoenix, and eventually do every single story arc at least once, except the what is it, the incarnate, who will die story arc. I did that one with my best friend, and I absolutely hated it, so I'm not going to go back and do that one. Like, if there's story arcs I hate, I won't go back and do them. A lot of the newer ones, with the newer kind of style of the arcs, I don't do those because I don't like them. But the old school arcs that I like this one, yeah, I'm gonna make sure that I do those all on this character. And so, yeah, I like that, so I'm gonna do what I like. Now, again, it doesn't make anybody else wrong, but I frequently shocked the members of my supergroup by the fact that I do this. And then they would say, oh, well, yeah, well, what we're saying as advice wouldn't work if you're doing story arcs, you know, soloing story arcs in, you know, the regular game. This is just how to do group farming in the Architect or what have you, right? And so they had very specific goals, and their build advice was great for achieving the goals they had. I keep feeling like I hear a glowy, but I don't see one. Sorry, I'm being quiet here because I'm trying to listen for a glowy, but I guess not. Oh, it's this thing. I'm hearing that a little bit. Okay. You're probably not hearing it because the volume is lower for you guys than it is in my headphones. So yeah, I mean, build advice is great, but make sure you understand the purpose for which the build advice is being given, and clarify that, because again, a lot of players make assumptions that you're going to be playing the game the way they do, and it doesn't even occur to them to say, oh, this is only if you're doing X. They think everybody does X because everybody they know does X, right? Everybody on my supergroup except me was doing like farming and incarnate runs, right, at one point. And that's why the one other scrapper, look at how many times I'm missing these guys. That's why the one other scrapper, again, 89% and I missed. Again, 72% and missed. You see what I mean here? I rolled an 85, 8, 98, 70, 98, 98, 93. You see how high I'm rolling? How many in the 90s? Like, if you were a GM watching somebody roll dice like that, you'd say, get some new dice. Right? Because you'd start to worry, are the dice... Not that they're deliberately rigged, but there are badly made dice, especially the plastic ones. That's why I switched to metal dice. I actually watched a video of a guy who cut open his plastic dice and showed that sometimes there are air pockets inside, and it makes the die not be a solid polyhedron, and therefore it doesn't roll properly. It favors one side versus the other, and it feels like that's what I'm doing here, is I'm playing with these unbalanced dice. Anyway, back to builds. So My advice to you is clarify with the other person, because people often assume that you're playing their way, like my supergroup did, right? They were all playing one way, and so people often assume that you're going to just play their way, and clarify with them which style is this build for, and explain to them, I want to do like solo story arcs from level 1 to 50. And I want to get them from +0 to as high as +2 or 3 if I can. I'd love to do +4 times 8. What's the best way to do it, right? And then they know what it is you're looking for, and they may or may not be able to help you, right? If you say to me, I want to do +4 times 8 missions with my controller, I'm going to say to you, I am not the person to ask. Because A, I don't play controllers at all, and B, I don't generally do +4 times anything, because it takes too long, right? It's going to... And you gain too much XP per mission. Guys, a lot of the players want the maximum XP per mission so they can do the fewest number of missions they can to get to level 50. I'm doing things like turning off XP and doing as many missions as I can to level 50. I don't want to level that fast. Right? My goal is to have this experience of playing Liberty Last to 50 last a long time. I love playing her. I have no desire to stop playing her, which is what I'm going to do when I get to 50. Now, one of the contrasts between me and other people is that a lot of the other players won't stop playing at 50. That's where they feel like the game starts. I remember somebody saying at one point, this game starts at 50. When it was, there was somebody on one of the global channels, this is a while ago when City of Heroes first came back, and somebody new to the game was on the channel asking about, I don't know, I guess they didn't like the gameplay at about this level. And he was sort of like, I'm already 30th level and it's all kind of monotonous and blah, blah, blah. And so, have I been anywhere? It looks like I've been everywhere. And one of the other players said, well, don't, just, farm the architect. This game starts at 50. And I didn't say anything, but I thought, well, for me, it ends at 50, right? I'm like, okay, I get to make up a new character now and try that character. And my supergroup mates would say, but what for? You've already done these missions. Why do you need to do them again? Well, I want to see how this other character does these missions. They play differently, and I want to enjoy that. And I like the missions. And one of the things I really like about City of Heroes is how they progress the mobs that you fight. Some enemies go from 1 to 50. The Circle of Thorns is one group that you do find at all the level ranges. But a lot of the enemies are only in certain level ranges. So yeah, after a while I start missing the Hellions and I want to fight them again. Or I can't wait to fight Malta, but then I've fought enough Malta. Right, let's go back and fight some Freak Show. Let's go back and fight some Family, which you don't see after level 29. Right? I enjoy fighting the different enemies. So everybody plays it differently. Just clarify with the person you're talking to. What's your playstyle? What playstyle is this build designed for? And if they ask you what do you mean, say, look, this is how I plan to play. Will what you're suggesting help me? Right? The person in question was saying, asking about soloing controllers, and is it like, can you do that? And I just said you can solo anything, but a lot of it depends on your preferences. Right? As I said, this one friend of mine who played controllers a lot said she used to set all of her missions to -1 at low levels, and then she set them to +0 when she got like into the 20s. And she didn't set them on +1s for a long time, maybe ever. She said that's just the way I have to do it as a controller, or she has to do it as a controller, to keep herself happy, right? To make it so that it's just not so slow going through the missions, right? Because controllers can take a long time. They just don't do that much damage compared to something like a Brute or a Stalker, right? So kind of everybody has their own playstyle. You're going to have yours. Give yourself time, if you haven't played this a lot, to develop, figure out what your favorite playstyle is. And once you know it, make sure that when you ask for build advice, you clarify what it is you're trying to do. And I would say the same thing for me. If you're going to ask me for help, first of all, I can only help you with my playstyle, which is to do the story arcs solo or in groups. I mean, I do know how to do that. I don't do it much anymore, but I do know how to do it. I can tell you how to do the normal story arc missions at normal-ish difficulty settings like this, and I can tell you how to slot for that and what powers to take and that kind of thing. But I can't help you with other stuff, and I can't necessarily help you with the archetypes I haven't gotten to high level because I just haven't done it yet, right? So somebody asked me, what level do you go to +1? Right? And what I said, if you go back and look at the answer, and I think I said it verbally here too, for this character, I went up at level 22 because I had a full set of SOs at level 22. I could afford that. You see this? How I'm whiffing and I have a 69% chance? So I said, this is how I do it. Right? But, and then I add a detail, like for scrappers and stalkers and stuff, I do this, and for tankers, I do that, and I haven't really done the other ones, so I can't really tell you. I don't remember what I did with my mastermind, but I don't think I went up at 22 because I don't think her pets could handle it. And so I can't tell you as a blanket case when to go to +1. It depends on your archetype, it depends on your power set, it depends on your comfort level with risk. It depends on how many times you want to do hospital runs, right? All of that kind of stuff. It just depends on your playstyle and how you're going to build. Right? It depends on how much influence you have. Can you afford SOs or maybe something better? Right? So when you ask for build advice or you take build advice, just make sure you're clear on what the person's building for and what their build is designed to do. Okay. Now the other thing I did want to talk about regarding builds was something, I love this expression called build tuning. So this comes, we finished the story arc and we got 28 more reward merits, which means we're over 400 now. This comes from Kelsey Dion, the author of the game Shadow Dark. I've been keeping an eye out, and I missed the Kickstarter. And it turns out that they now have the hardcover available for non-Kickstarter purchase. So I bought the hardcover. I guess luckily or unluckily, the collector's edition is sold out. But I got the regular hardcover edition, and you get a PDF with it because most companies do that now, other than Wizards of the Coast. And so I got the PDF, and I was reading through the Shadow Dark book, and it's great if you like D&D, but you want more of a rules light, simplified system that's also a little grittier and more likely to lead to character death, or at least risk it. The risk of character death, it's worth a look. The PDF by itself without the hardcover is relatively cheap, I think. Don't take my word for it. There are lots of reviews of it online. Professor Dungeon Master reviews it. I'm not sure if Luke Hart reviews it. I think Seth Skorkowski might have reviewed it. I think Baron Durop reviewed it. What is he? Dungeon Masterpiece. A couple of other people. Bob Worldbuilder possibly. There's tons of it online, and Kelsey herself has multiple videos where she's explaining the game system, and there's also some quick starter trial rules that you can download for free, I think, that are just a little booklet of like a starter set. So don't take my word for it. Go ahead and check it out for yourself before purchasing. I'm not making any purchase recommendations. Just saying I think it's a cool game. But one of the things I noticed is, so she has something very similar to Dungeon Crawl in it. You can avoid this. She has some rules for bypassing it. But the default in Shadow Dark is that you start out with 4 level 0 characters. Each player starts with 4 characters. And what you're supposed to do is randomly, you can choose stuff, but what she wants you to do is randomly roll up those characters. You roll up your stats, you roll them in order, you put them where they land, right? You don't take your 18 and put it in strength. Whatever you rolled for strength is it. You rolled a 4, you've got a 4. I don't think there's drop the lowest or anything. I think it's just roll 3 dice and put them in there. And so you come up with 4 characters. Now the logic of this is, statistically, one of those 4 is probably going to have some pretty decent stats. You then randomly roll their gear, their race, their class, their background, all that stuff is randomly assigned. And then they go through something called a gauntlet, which is like the Dungeon Crawl Classics funnel. Hang on a sec. Okay, let's call our contact and get our XP. There we go. So she has other missions, but we're going to leave her alone now and go to the next contact. Let's go to Brickstown. She wants you to randomly roll everything, bring your characters through the gauntlet, and play the character that survives. Right? That's the whole idea. And when she talks about why you would want to do this, to the GM, she's explained to the GM, why do you want to do this? She said it helps cut down on or prevent tuning of builds, or build tuning, right? And I thought this was such a great word. It really is analogous to somebody who's, instead of just driving the car that you bought out of the factory, right, has hyper-tuned it so that it gets better acceleration, right? It goes from 0 to 60 in 5.99 seconds instead of 6.01 seconds, and that kind of thing. And so a lot of what people are describing in City of Heroes in the builds, when they're giving you build examples or telling you how they recommend that you build, falls under the category of build tuning, right? I don't really tune the builds. What I'm doing is pretty standard stuff, right, with SOs. You're just putting damage, accuracy, recharge, and endurance reducers in reasonably normal proportions, right? 2 and 3, 3 and 2, etc. You've got your health and your stamina. This is like the way people used to build when the game launched. Other than these things instead of SOs, what they are and what they represent and what you have in here is basically the way people did it all the way through live before there were incarnate trials and stuff like that. So I don't really tune my builds. Okay. The guy who was doing the farming mission that I described to you, where he only had a few of his primary powers, he only slotted 2 or 3 of them, and he took specific powers and specific enhancements and slotted specific things, and he went into a specific mission, right? That character was fine-tuned, hyper-tuned to go into that mission against those enemies and get as many drops as possible per minute to max out. I don't even know if finishing the mission even mattered, because what they were looking for is the drops, and the drops come from defeating enemies, right? You might get a drop from completing a mission, but it's just going to be 1, right? And this guy's looking for, and he was saying he just goes to the vendor and gets rid of all yellow and white stuff, and all he puts on the auction house is the oranges, and I don't know if he gets any purples. Level 47, maybe you don't, but oranges and or purples. That's all that goes on the auction house, right? It's not even worth his time to do the others. So all he's doing is trying to take out the lieutenants or bosses or whatever they are as fast as possible so he can get as many drops as possible so that he can sell those on the auction house to get influence. And his build is incredibly fine-tuned for that. It's like a Formula 1 race car, right? A Formula 1 race car is incredibly fine-tuned to run on a specific type of track at a specific velocity under a specific set of circumstances. But if you try to drive that thing around your neighborhood, you'd get into accidents. It's not capable of taking the corners the way a Honda Accord or a Toyota Camry or a Ford Fusion is, because those cars are designed for generic driving, and a Formula 1 race car is designed for something else. Wow. Yeah, I went in a little over my head here. But fortunately, one thing we have is a bunch of AoEs if we don't miss them all. And that really helps. So what I'm driving on this channel, what you're doing is you're seeing me driving a Ford Taurus or whatever, straight off essentially off the factory, right? A standard sedan, and I'm driving it on the neighborhood roads and the interstate highways, and not getting into accidents, and I'm driving safely, and I'm getting where I need to go in a pretty efficient way using a GPS, right? Kind of everyday driving. What the guy doing the farming missions was doing, right, was driving a very specifically tuned Formula race car that is particularly tuned with the right type of turn radius and braking and whatever, not only to drive on a racetrack, but to drive on a very specific racetrack in a very specific location with very specific environmental conditions, humidity, etc. And the tires and the wheels and the steering and everything is all specifically tuned just for that race. Now that car is going to crush my sedan at running that race. But if it tries to drive in my neighborhood where the speed limit is 15 and there's a really tight... Look at this. 3 misses in a row with 72%. Driving around my neighborhood with a pretty tight circle when you're coming into the neighborhood, and blind turns where like there's trees in the way and you have to be very slow and careful going around there. No sidewalks, people pulling out of driveways, people walking dogs, kids walking home from school. Yeah, that Formula race car is going to kill somebody. It's not designed to drive in a neighborhood like mine, the way my, Toyota Camry or whatever would be, right? And so, so that's kind of my point about the builds. But I do want to talk a little bit about build tuning. I think, like, you want to ask, why would the GM want to avoid build tuning, right? Well, one of the reasons is that it does lead to hyper-specialized characters, and now the GM might feel obligated to cater to that specialization, which is going to restrict the options for building adventures and stuff. But the real problem with build tuning is that depending on how it's done, it can lead to, what's the word? Anomalous, atypical behaviors, right? The guy who did the burn tanking the day the game launched and dumpster dove, right? I've told that story where he got into a dumpster that was about this size, right? And it was open on the inside, so he could get inside. The mobs couldn't get into him. They couldn't figure out how to get to him. And he was with mobs that couldn't fly, I assume. Boomtown or something. He gathered up all the aggro. The mobs surrounded him, and then he laid a bunch of burn patches down and just let them melt, right? And he got all this XP super fast, which is kind of what the farmers are doing, right? That's kind of what the guy farming was doing. He had tuned his build on day 1 to do that, and it worked really well, and he got to level 40 in a single day. Why is it a problem? Because it's not the way the game was designed to be played. It caused the developers to freak out and got Burn, Hasten, and Tankers severely nerfed. Because it's not how the developers designed the game to be played. So the risk you run by over-tuning is you can make the game inadvertently too easy by making your character be more powerful than the game designers anticipated it would be possible for characters to be, right? This is the same thing with things like coffee locks and everything. I mean, when you're doing things that the designer didn't expect, then the module they created, the adventures they created, the campaign, isn't going to be strong enough to fight you, right? Like, a lot of people say you have to be careful playing the old D&D adventures because they're not written with the modern 2024 build style in mind that includes all these races and subclasses that didn't exist in 2013 when the Horde of the Dragon Queen or whatever was written, right? And the Rise of Tiamat. There are apparently a lot of problems with those adventures just in terms of their design. They're apparently not all that much fun to play anyway, but if you play them with characters that are built off the current set of expansion books, the character's going to blast through everything because the kind of tuning that you can now do wasn't possible in 2013 because they didn't have all of the options they have now. And so it was never anticipated that you would do that by the people who wrote the books. And since the books are now, they're hardcover, they're published, they're done, right? There's no way to update them to make them actually work for the way it is now. And so the thing you have to be careful of with build tuning, and the reason that Kelsey in Shadowdark is trying to help you avoid it, is that it makes the game easier. And the goal, at least that she has, is to challenge you. Right, and she talks about that. It's not the GM versus the players, but as a GM you have to remember that the challenge is fun. And she talks about how death is on the table, and I even quoted it for a friend of mine who really wants death to always be on the table. She said that the fact that characters can die creates the tension of the scene, and it is that tension, when it's tuned properly, I'm saying this, not she didn't say it exactly this way, but that tension, when it's tuned properly to be challenging but not insane, is what's fun, right? That's why I set this on +1, right? It's fun for me to sometimes dive into a bunch of Orange Freak Show and be like, oh crap, I have to use my inspirations now, right? I wouldn't want to go through a mission never having to use inspirations. That's not interesting. That's not fun. There's an enjoyable tension to some level of risk or danger. In this case, the risk of face planting. In Shadowdark, it's the risk of character death, right? For instance, in Shadowdark, there's no, as far as I could see, I didn't spend a lot of time poring over the spells, but from the spell lists, I don't think there's a resurrection spell or a raise dead. I think that when your character dies, it's permanent. So your character hits 0 hit points, you have like a handful of rounds based on your constitution and a random number that for somebody to like save you with a healing potion, and if they don't do it in that amount of time, your character dies, right? And she wants there to be a real risk of death because that is what makes it interesting, right, and challenging. And so, and I want there to be some risk of face planting because that's what makes it interesting and challenging, right? That's what makes me want to keep coming back and playing. Temporary power, what do we got here? I already have that. So this is the mission where you earn it. And then they eventually made it so that you could unlock it without having to earn it in that mission. But that's the mission where you earn the Nemesis Staff. So we got to go back to our buddy. Man, we got a lot of enhancements today, right? Because I already sold like 4 or 5 of them. And we're now halfway through level 31, guys. Hopefully, we'll do Neil Kendrick's story arc. If he gives me one before level 32, we will do that. And when I hit 32, I will again do a flashback mission and then come back to you guys and play out level 32. So what I'm going to do is sort of each level, I'm going to try each level to do 1 story arc and 1 flashback mission. As we get to the higher levels, what's going to happen is a story arc won't get us all the way through a level. It'll only get us like half a level, and then I'll probably finish that level off screen, or maybe we'll do like rather than doing. What I don't want to do is like say do all 5 story arcs between like say level 40 and 42, and then have 3 levels where you're not going to watch me. So what I'll try to do is do a story arc, and then do a flashback to gain experience. I won't turn the XP off, and then come back at the next level and do the next story arc, then do a flashback, and so on and so forth. So that you can see how this character plays at each level, right? Rather than skipping levels. If we can do that, that's what we'll try to do. Unless you guys want something else, if you do, feel free to let me know. All right, so the Freak Show War is the next story arc, guys. I'm not going to take this mission because it might be timed. And I think we've done enough for today. I hope you guys have enjoyed. Let me know what your comments are about builds and build tuning. And the one thing I do want to say is if you are leaving comments or keeping in mind the fact that people have different goals and different intentions and so on for how they want to play, please, if you're going to post build advice to me or to other people in the comments, please clarify what's the goal of the build, right? Are you talking about this is a good build for running missions and story arcs, or is this for Incarnate Trials, or is it a farming build, or is it for doing task forces? Is it for something else entirely? So please make sure that you clarify those sorts of things for us when you make posts about builds, okay? Just so that everybody is clear. And to clarify mine, whenever I'm talking about how I do builds, it's always for how I play these characters, which is to go to 1 to 50, doing all the story arcs I can. So I hope you guys have enjoyed, and until next time, I am Scrapperlock, and this has been City of Heroes.